It's Roundtable Friday here on Northwest Digital News. Kevin Hunter here at the broadcast desk. Our special guest, Glen Morgan, has joined us today. And we have Chris Bornstead and Kyle Torgerson. Well, Kyle, actually, you're not going to hit us up with the weather today because we're not interested in what's going on in the weather. We're actually interested.
Now you know.
Yeah, there you go. It's Washington. It's raining.
Yeah.
It's Washington. It's raining, yes. So we have, Glen, your website here on the background for anybody who wants to follow along with some of the stories we'll reference here today. Go to wethegoverned.com. I actually like your play on that because for people who don't get this, this is a contrast to We the People. Yes.
It is, yeah. No, exactly. And it's, you know, you read about, we always talk about We the People, and I think that, and it is a little bit of a negative, you know, statement, but saying We the Governed, because government has really set itself up so that they don't treat us like we the people anymore. They really treat us like their subjects, whether that's the bureaucracy, or the politicians, or the special interests that are involved in both. And so they treat us like we the governed. And so that was kind of my angle of, you know, with the website originally when I started years ago. And I think it's still true today with a lot of the stories I write about exposing corruption. And they still treat us like we the governed. And my goal is to get us back to where we can be we the people again and be in charge of our own destiny and our government and bureaucracy.
People are aware of things that have gone on in recent years, some of the things you've been working on, but I want to take you back all the way to your college days. And stepping out of high school and deciding where you wanted to go, something lit the fire under you to get involved in these things on relative to our government and relative to politics.
Right.
What kind of started that fire?
It's funny, the socialists started the fire for me. and it, you know, I ended up, despite being a fifth generation Washingtonian, I ended up going back to New York City to go to college. I went to Columbia.
Right.
You know, college that's done great harm, you know, to our country and produced a lot of terrible people in government. But I went back there, and I certainly didn't go there thinking I was ever going to be involved in any kind of political stuff at all. That wasn't ever my thought. I was a runner. I cared about school. I was really kind of intimidated by this whole environment, getting back in the East Coast, and you know, especially being a rural kid from Washington. You know, it was a different environment. And what it really was, especially by my freshman year, every day I had to go to class. I had to fight my way through some stupid protest over something, you know. And I, you know, as a freshman, I just tried to put my head down and ignore most of it. And it was my sophomore year that I finally got frustrated enough that I remember the socialists were out in the quad area of the campus, just talking about how evil America was and how terrible it was. And they said, this is an open mic. Anybody who wants to come up and speak can come up and talk. And I said, well, it's an open mic. I have something to say. I was really frustrated with them. And the funny thing is, of course, they said, well, they really didn't mean that. They just meant only their own people could come up and talk. And they said, well, we don't think you're in solidarity with us, so we're not going to let you speak. And that's what inspired
No freedom for your speech.
No freedom for mine, yeah. And so that's what it started me. And you know, what happened is I wanted to start, actually, I was going to start a libertarian or conservative group on campus. And there was all this red tape. And so I thought, well, I'll do what any good activist would do, and that is take over an existing group on campus because it was just too hard to get to the red tape.
Hey, why not borrow somebody else?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So the college Republicans still existed at Columbia. Now, it was hard to find the handful that were there. It was you had to meet in a deep, you know, dark location, secret location. They handed the girl that gave me the key, I remember she was just happy to be out of it. She gave me the key to their mailbox, and that allowed me to take over a student group that I could start running, you know, which was the college Republicans. And so immediately, I remember the first thing I did is I brought the National Rifle Association to campus, and we brought Dinesh D'Souza to campus. We had debates. We really did a lot of pretty active things on campus, and that's really what got the ball started for me and being involved in politics.
Let's talk about Dinesh for just a moment, because as a lot of people in this area know, Dinesh D'Souza is going to be in Longview on May the 4th. So that's going to be very cool to hear what he has to say. But you got him involved back in your college days. Talk about that, and even go to explain a little bit about the spaghetti party that happened after. Yeah,
well, what was funny is that, so I'd heard about Dinesh because he had just written this book called Illiberal Education, because he had just graduated from Dartmouth. And he, it had just hit the newsstands at the time. You got to remember, there's no internet. This is early '90s, and so we found out about him. And we thought, well, we'll bring him to campus. And so he was early in his career, and which was really neat. And we brought him to campus, and it was the most well-attended political event at Columbia that any student group had hosted at that point in time. We had 600 students. You can still go back and read the Spectator newspaper, which is the local paper on campus. And we brought him to campus. Of course, the socialists tried to, you know, shut down the event, and they tried to speak to him like they always do. But he did a phenomenal job. I remember how impressed I was with his poise and just what he had to say, and it was really effective and really had an impact, I thought, on the student body at the time. But again, 600 students showing up, and it's in the middle of New York City. That may not sound like a big number, but when you live there, there's so many other things to do. The last thing any student usually they're bored with political events, and to get that many to come out and hear somebody is unusual. And then afterwards, just to show what a very down-to-earth guy he was, we had a bunch of the Republicans, the college Republicans. We had our own dorm room. You know, we had all gone together in a dorm room, and so we made pizza or spaghetti. We had spaghetti that night, and so we invited him over, and he came out and hung out in our dorm room with us, and we visited for hours. You know, just about different issues and topics, and some future books he was planning to write at the time.
Yep.
And I remember really being impressed with just what a regular person he was, down to earth. He didn't have an ego associated with himself or anything. I mean, he was just happy to be there, and you know, when we were really happy to have him. So it was very fun to have him there. And of course, he became a much bigger and well-known person later on. You know, when we saw him later, and I ran into him a couple years ago in Spokane when he spoke at the Spokane Lincoln Day dinner, I think about 3 years ago, and I actually brought my old flyer that I still had from the day we brought him to Columbia, and he signed it, you know, about what a crazy time it was, and he signed, I don't know, it was fun to do that. So but yeah, so that was fun. It was fun to see him, and fun to see him again years later.
We have a connection with another person who's very well known today because of his connection with the president, but there was a former federal prosecutor who was going to run for mayor. Talk about that story a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the advantages of going to Columbia was, in addition to having lots of leftists to confront all the time, but one of the other advantages was that it was relatively easy to get really big name speakers there if you made the effort. And at the time, Rudy Giuliani was going to run for mayor. It was a couple years beforehand. We were right in the middle of the David Dinkins administration. And while I was in college, I mean, people forget about this, but New York City was becoming the murder capital of America. You know, within just a few miles of my dorm room, you know, thousands of people every year were being murdered. You know, and I remember they'd be excited when they have 100 fewer murders. You know, one year to the next, and it was really bad. I think the crime, people don't realize just how bad it really was.
Yeah.
And so I remember inviting Giuliani to campus, and we had about 100, 150 students that I remember showed up and to hear him speak. And of course, he got the usual attacks from the left, a lot of odd questions that were, you know, trying to see if they could throw him off. And to be honest, I remember thinking, God, this is a really great guy, very knowledgeable, clearly a New Yorker. But I remember thinking, there's no way that this guy could ever be elected mayor. He's a Republican running in a city that hadn't elected a Republican in decades, that was clearly on the path to ruin. And there was, what chance did this guy really have? I remember thinking that distinctly. But I also remember thinking how knowledgeable he was, because he had all these obscure questions. It didn't matter what people asked, he really understood New York City. I mean, it didn't matter if it was the discussion of the pump station on 125th Street and the water flow through it, or a crime down in the Midtown. He was really knowledgeable. And I remember how impressed I was later on when I would go to New York after I graduated, and of course he got elected, and I'd come back and I would see how different New York City was. Just one man getting in there and sticking to his principles, and I know it wasn't perfect, and there's a lot of drama when you get into politics and into local government, but he actually got in there and made a difference, and the crime rate, you know, completely dropped. It's not recognizable in comparison to what it was before. The city was cleaner. I mean, there were all kinds of things that he really genuinely had an impact on, and I know that he wanted to do more, and there were things that he wasn't able to accomplish. But it was really a classic example of somebody willing to stand up, charge, you know, against the machine, and it was a big machine in New York City, and actually prevail, and then make a difference when he got in, which I think was pretty amazing. So that was a neat time, you know, neat to meet him. I'm sure he wouldn't remember me, but I was one of the guys that brought him up to campus, and it was fun to talk to him a little bit afterwards too, and just know this guy really was willing to do it and get in there, and sure enough, he did, and it was successful.
Well, now he's the president's attorney.
One of many. Yeah, one of many. Yeah, one of many at this point in time, sure.
Yes. Yeah. So we hear a lot from him on the news. Well, I wanted to, all interesting stuff. And so then at some point, when did We the Governed, when did you actually launch this organization? And for people who are following us, by the way, you can go to wethegoverned.com, and if you want to help subscribe, you can get notifications there, and even support. So if you would scroll down to where that is and show that to people real quick, Kyle, so people know how to find it.
I did post the link in the comments.
You did post the link in the comments?
Links in the comments.
Okay, all right.
All right. All right, so there's ways to get, you know, subscribe and also support We the Government. So talk a little bit about when you launched this and really kind of what your end game is that you're hoping to accomplish with it.
Sure, and I launched it in 2015, late 2015. I think the website actually launched early 2016, and I had been working at the Freedom Foundation for a number of years before then. And what really got me back into politics was, like many people who suddenly run into, I had moved to Thurston County out of King County, and we had family property there, and I ran into the code enforcement people who came out to harass me one time, and it was purely a harassment case. You know, they said they sent a bunch of people out to my rural property, nothing special about my place, but boy were they trying to find a problem, you know, with me and trying to harass me. And it made me look closer at county government, which made I decided to run for the most exciting office ever created, the assessor's office, you know, in 2010, and I lost. I didn't know what I was doing at all when I jumped in to run for that office. But in the course of doing that, you doorbell all kinds of people in the county. You go around and you see thousands of people. At least you do if you're going to run a serious campaign. And it really highlighted, as I was doorbelling all these homes, strangers who I'd never met throughout the county, and literally thousands of them, and I had a lot of volunteers that were helping me. I realized just how problematic the county was in general and how abusive it was, and realizing that I was able to deal with these nasty code enforcement people that came out to my property, but that most people, you know, a retired person or, you know, a new family or something, they would not be able to handle the very dishonest and abusive behavior that was exhibited by the bureaucrats who came to my property. And I realized that nobody was really exposing or confronting what was really happening in local government and how impactful it is for all of us in our day-to-day lives. And so the Freedom Foundation actually wanted to hire me after that, and I started out doing property rights. That's what I did when I worked for them.
Sure.
And so I traveled all around the state. You know, Thurston County wasn't alone. It was a problem throughout the state of Washington. And so in the course of being engaged in that process, the Freedom Foundation later on in 2014 decided they weren't going to do property rights anymore. And so they shut down the property rights division, and it was really in my heart to keep focused on that. And so that's when I wanted to go and do something on my own. So I started the We the Governed, and then later on also went to help Citizens Alliance for Property Rights, which has been around for a long time, and I'm still involved as their executive director right now. But mostly with We the Governed, it's still about exposing corruption. It's about continuing that fight. And I think that the goal there is mainly by exposing the truth about what's actually happening, mainly in local government. I don't care about what's going on in D.C., not because I don't care, but because nobody else cares about what I think about it anyway. There's thousands of people who write about it or talk about it all the time, but very few people are focused on what's actually happening in our state or local communities, at least on a consistent basis where you can really start to expose what's happening there. And so I think that that's the purpose that I had with We the Governed. I get to write about, the nice thing is when you have your own site and you get to write about whatever you want, so the topics that interest you are the ones that you get to write about, and nobody can tell you what you can and cannot do with it, which is really nice. And
wait, there's no censorship going on these days, is there?
well, you know,
Nothing to be concerned about.
He's right on when it comes to getting involved with local government. I think if more people would educate themselves and be more involved, things would be a lot different.
I think they would be too, and part of it's the collapse of the traditional media. You know, not because of any grand conspiracy, but you know, there's a lot of things are changing, and so your local media is just disappearing the way that we would think of it. And so there's a lag time between the collapse and people recognizing that it doesn't exist anymore. And so I really see myself, and hopefully a lot of other people are filling in this niche or trying to step up as citizens and fill in this niche of we're going to try to provide information about the truth about what's going on in local communities and with our bureaucracy or our government. And really it's important and incumbent on us that we do that, because if we don't, and I think they're emboldened right now to do a lot more things that are I don't think they would have tried if there was an active and aggressive media really paying attention to what's happening in local government. And so I'm trying in my own way, you know, to fill that little role. More importantly, I'd like to inspire more people to do this. You know, not just me, but a lot more people.
Well,
to do this.
I can tell you right now, you've inspired more people to do this. I know
I'd love
that
to hear
for
that.
sure.
I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
I know absolutely for sure, because you know, even some of the people down here in our area, you know, I've been running social media sites for 4 years and targeting politics and getting information out to people. And you know, we've done some of the same things that you have done. You know, we learned by watching examples from you. You know, I've actually processed a PDC complaint against somebody. That person was guilty as heck, but they got off, and that's you know, it happens, and you can't catch them all. But we need more people just like you. We need more people just like you and Tim Eyman, and we need more people from the cities pushing back and Olympia.
Right.
Chris, you mentioned PDC complaints.
Yes.
And one of the things, Glenn, that has put a bullseye on you by
Right.
some people in the political arena is the work that you've done in campaign finance. And I just want to read these stats off of the website. 433 PDC complaints,
Yep.
38 politicians and PACs fines for a tune of $498,300 in fines. That's
Right.
a big smackaroo.
Yeah, and a lot more are coming. I mean, so a number are still in process that you'll be reading about over the next few months and maybe over the next year. The wheels of the process are slow, but they eventually do tend to spit things out. And I want to explain how that all started, because it wasn't my plan to be Mr. PDC, Public Disclosure Commission guy, and file campaign finance complaints. I'm a skeptic in general of campaign finance laws because I believe they exist primarily to protect incumbents. They're written to protect incumbents, and they're designed primarily to
Spot on.
prevent
Exactly.
new people from running for office. Basically, they're designed as a way to trip up people running for office. And what had happened is, when I got involved in 2016 elections in Thurston County, I was pretty engaged in exposing a couple of the people that were running for county commission at the time. And so for the first time, and I believe this was pretty successful, just exposing and being engaged, and I set up my own PAC, and the Thurston County Commission became 100% independent. No Republican, no Democrats on the commission, which is the first time since statehood that there wasn't a Democrat on the county commission, to my knowledge. And certainly the first time in state history that we had 3 people running a county like that had no political party affiliation. It's never happened before.
Crazy.
And I know I was involved in that
Yeah.
heavily. What happened is, of course, in the process, they filed PDC complaints on me, which is what always is done. And I had lawsuits, I had death threats, I had all kinds of crazy stuff happen, all in a short window of time in late 2016. So I started pushing back, filing PDC complaints, and I thought I knew the law. I actually was fairly familiar with the campaign finance laws, but as much as an average person would be. And I realized I had State Senator Sam Hunt, I filed a complaint on him, and he said, Glen Morgan doesn't know anything about the campaign finance laws. He's just completely ignorant of them. And as a way to dismiss the complaint that I filed on him. And I realized as I read the law, and I thought, he's absolutely right. I am ignorant. I better get educated. So I really got educated. My next complaint on him was actually much more effective, and he did go to court, and the AG did sue him, and he had to pay a fine associated with that. So I really appreciated Sam Hunt's.
He motivated you.
Senator
to
Sam Hunt
get-
motivated me. Yeah. And also I was watching Attorney General Bob Ferguson use the system to attack exclusively Republicans. And it was really clearly a partisan effort on his part, going after Tim Eyman, going after Kim Wyman at the time, and going after this Grant County prosecutor that he didn't like, or a candidate, I should say, that didn't like, somebody who was involved in the campaign process down there. And so it made me study the law, and I realized that violations were all over the place. But what happens is the average people, citizens, weren't really paying attention to who was violating the law. And so I started filing a lot more complaints. And some of my early complaints were weak. They got better as I went along. It's like anything else. You got to practice. You know, practice makes perfect. And eventually it inspired all kinds of exposure of people who were violating the law, including out here, Teresa Purcell, who was a candidate for the 19th Ledge District in this area. She was one of the early people that the Attorney General sued. And he didn't want to sue her. He was forced to sue her because of the way the law is set up. I was able to file what's called a citizen action notice, and it create a time frame where the choice was either he sues her or I sued her. Theoretically, I could sue her. And so because of that, the AG sued her to protect her. That's why that lawsuit was filed against her. And obviously her nephew worked at the AG's office, so that was probably part of it as well. But that she was just one of 19 different lawsuits the Attorney General filed. And then the employee who worked there, Walter Smith, who was an AG employee, quit. And he said, I didn't go to work at the AG's office to sue Democrats. You know, and so he quit, and it was an overt partisan effort. And I had some interaction with him before, and the only reason this guy had ever talked to me, I was bringing whistleblower information because Democrats were coming to me with all these campaign finance violations of other Democrats that they knew about, and they would say, here's bank statements, here's check registries, they're hiding money. And I would bring it into the AG's office, and I would say, listen, I think you guys need to have this for evidence. You know, and it's as a citizen bringing it into him, and all he wanted to do was he wanted to know who was giving me the information so that he could expose them and make sure that the Democrats got rid of anybody internally that was actually willing to blow the whistle.
I'm actually really encouraged to hear that, though, that people within the party recognizing that people in their own party who were abusing those things were actually helping to expose that. I'm really encouraged to hear that.
Yeah, no, that was actually, I wouldn't have been able to file nearly the volume of complaints I did, or to the detail that I was able to file them, if it wasn't for help from other Democrats who were disgusted or disillusioned or disappointed, whatever it was, that with the way their party was being run. And it varied all over the state, right? And without that help, I couldn't have filed nearly the volume. I mean, I do appreciate that. The truth is, whistleblowers within the Democrat Party and people who care about the truth are the ones who will ultimately reform it in a way that it needs to be reformed. And I think that I had a lot of the help from them. And it didn't mean that they even agreed with me politically. It didn't matter. I mean, the politics don't really matter in this case. It's just simply the exposure of what's happening. The interesting thing is this: Walter Smith quit, and then he spent his time as a private citizen now filing complaints against Republicans. And so that's really what he did. And so, and it's interesting that that's what happened, that a bunch of complaints were filed against Republicans. And I knew eventually that when you caught enough political insiders, the Speaker of the House, right, a lot of these county parties, the state Democrat Party, all these people, you caught them all violating the law, eventually they would have to change the law. And because they had always intended it only to beat up on new people running for office, they'd never intended it to be used against them. They never imagined anybody would ever use it against them. And so because of that, they passed a law in 2018 called the Stop Glen Morgan Bill, was the nickname that the Democrats gave it. And it was HB 2938. And there was actually a lot of reform in that law that I liked. And it really did reduce some of the strict liability elements and ridiculous elements of the statute that basically everybody violated inadvertently when they started. So I thought some of those reforms were good. There were a few that weren't good. I mean, there were a few reforms that they made that probably have eliminated some level of accountability, you know, that was otherwise at least still there in some form. But you know, to a large extent, that was one of my goals, was to reform the law, and I felt like a lot of those reforms that were implemented came about. There's no way they would have happened if I hadn't filed all those complaints. In fact, it was so unusual for them that there's a law in the books in the state that you can't vote on a law if you're a legislator, if by voting on it you're influencing something that's directly related to your own benefit, right? That's a very specific thing that they have in the law. It's self-dealing. And they actually had to push an exemption because they couldn't get a quorum in the legislature, because I'd filed so many complaints and there were so many pending against all of them that they basically would lose their quorum. And the Speaker of the House had to make a ruling that they had to suspend the rules as it applied to that so they could actually pass this law, because there were too many of them that were under investigation or currently had a complaint filed. So it was very funny.
One of the topics that I want to move on to, did you have a thought, Kyle?
Yeah, we have a comment from a viewer on Facebook. Jeff Wilson says, "Thank you, Glen Morgan, for acting on your words. That alone is a rare act anymore. Our government needs checks and balances, and you."
Well, that's very nice. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for the kind comments. I think it isn't about me. It's about getting more people to do what I'm doing and not imitating exactly what I'm doing, because the truth is everybody has their own passion. They're going to have something that they like and they think it matters to them. Maybe they're more focused on their city. Maybe they're more focused on a school district. Something that really matters to you, whatever your passion is, get interested, get involved, get engaged, educate yourself, and then try to find an effective way of changing what you don't like and reinforcing what you do like. And I think that's the best way to be involved in politics.
One of the things that anybody who is an activist, such as yourself, or thinking about becoming an activist, is that there's a significant effort out there to silence the voices of reason. Tons of it. And so when you mention, having your own website, We the Governed, allows you to share stories and information that otherwise might just be censored on a lot of different platforms. We see it here on Northwest Digital News all the time as well. If all we have to do is put a even somewhat controversial subject into our title line, and all of a sudden Facebook has a hiccup, right in the middle of our show. And
do
and
anything vaccination in your target.
Anything, that they're, it's funny how quickly things can get interrupted based on all that. But there is a big effort going on to silence the voices of reason. You've actually even attended court on behalf of some people specifically targeted in the effort to shut them up. Talk about that a little bit and what you're seeing out there, and is that effort becoming more intense as time goes on, you think?
I do think it's becoming more intense, and the effort is very clear and obvious, and it's not difficult to actually find examples, unfortunately, even where we live. It doesn't, even if you're, if you're Chris Rufo and you decide you want to run for the Seattle City Council, and then the volume of death threats that he received and the aggressive volume of death threats against him, his wife, trying to get her to lose her job at Microsoft, trying to go after his kids, in school and threaten them, and I don't think he expected that, and he wasn't an arch conservative guy. He was a voice of reason, for the Seattle City Council, and he wrote a white paper on the problems with the homeless, the approach that they supposedly had for the homeless in Seattle, and he really did a good job putting this document together. And the last thing they wanted was somebody who was going to challenge the status quo and actually start to question the corruption in Seattle. And I think that, and unfortunately he resigned, or he canceled his campaign. And what I don't like about that is that, of course, encourages more death threats and more people who are willing to come forward.
Hey, we won.
Yeah, we won, let's do it again. And so unfortunately, I think that encourages, you're going to see more people doing that. I've received my share of death threats, both in the mail and in writing. I had, the stupidest one was in 2016. I had a Democrat PCO actually call up and leave a voicemail death threat on me from his home phone, which by the way...
Didn't you put that video, didn't you put that online?
I did, I put the audio file online, nothing to hide. And so I put online, Como News came out and did a story on it, and I got a restraining order. It's pretty easy, by the way, if you go in to get a restraining order for somebody who threatens to kill you and they leave a voicemail, if you play the audio file in the courtroom, just so you know, it's like, that is actually almost perfect evidence. To his credit, the Democrat PCO showed up, he was there, and got a restraining order issued on him for a year. And other types of harassment. The lawsuits are the hardest because, unfortunately, we do have judges in the state that are also quite politically, our judges are elected, or they're, in most cases, actually appointed, and then they keep getting reelected. And the problem is that they know which side their political future is buttered on, right? They know that in order to stay in office, you have to be a leftist, and you must be progressive in how you decide to make your decisions. And so most of the decisions that judges do day to day don't probably have anything to do with politics. They're mundane, paper pushing, ex parte sort of activity or other things. I've had to sit in court way more than I've ever wanted to lately. And so because of that, I got to watch a lot of this stuff. Most of it's not controversial. But the things that are, the elements that where judicial discretion or decisions that a judge can make actually have an influence on the political process, allow those who are leftists and who really care more about politics than they do about the law to manipulate and use that law to abuse people like me, like Tim Hyman, like anybody else that potentially gets caught up in it. So whether it's a civil case or whether it's the Attorney General abusing his office and discretion to go after Tim Hyman to a degree that's unequaled in the state of Washington. I mean, the one thing, whether Tim Hyman violated campaign finance laws or not, my argument has always been that everybody's violated all of them to some, or has violated them to some extent. The issue with Tim Hyman is that the AG's office has dedicated more resources and committed more attention and attacks on Tim Hyman than all the other campaign finance cases going on in the state of Washington over the last couple of years combined. And it's easy to track that. There's measurable metrics you can look at. Staff time that they've assigned, number of attorneys they've assigned, how much money they say that they want him to pay in legal fees when they finally get to the end of this abusive process, and the amount of motion practice that they've used. 800 pleadings in that case, and it's nowhere near completed. And the objective, which they've been pretty honest about, has been to prevent him from ever participating in the political process again. And more important than that is to silence and intimidate anybody else like me or you or anybody who ever would think, hey, I want to get involved in the political process. That's the last thing they want you to do. And the political process, we use that generically, but I'm not even talking about PACs or being running for office, even just paying attention to what's going on locally, even just getting involved and engaged. That's really what they want to make sure you are prevented from doing that as much as they possibly can. And unfortunately, the system, the way it's set up right now, it's not a grand conspiracy. There's a lot of collusion that goes on to make this happen, but it is a problem, and it's one of the reforms that we have to really focus on, is restoring the constitutional protections that do exist for citizens and need to be applied more consistently. And there's a lot of things that need to be changed to get it to there, but unfortunately, we're witnessing the evidence of that right now, and it's self-serving and self-dealing, and those who are in political power right now are using this to their benefit.
I won't name the individual, but I had a conversation with a well-known, well-established judge, and we were talking about the justice system. And I mentioned the justice system, and immediately when I said it, he says, we have a legal system. And I went on to, again, recognizing what he had said there, but I again mentioned the justice system, and he goes, we have a legal system. And so I did it to him 3 times because I wanted, like, is he going to repeat this? And he said again, we have the legal system. And I said, so there's a thing called justice, which is part of a justice system. And then there's this system where you just use laws and the legal system to beat up and intimidate people. And he goes, we have a legal system. So he was making it really crystal clear that these kinds of efforts that you're talking about, even with regard to Tim Eyman, if anybody thinks that is the object of all of that is justice, it isn't.
No. Justice is long gone on that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, if even if everything that they've accused him of is true, and they've made a lot of hyperbole in that filing. Very different. I mean, the contrast of the filings that he's had versus, and I know this because of all the ones I've triggered that the AG didn't want to file because it was against their friends. I mean, the AGs reduce their attorney fees so they don't have to pay hardly anything. The AG spends very little time. They don't do any discovery on the ones I file. If they have to go after their friends, Bob Ferguson actually goes out and fundraises for these people so they can pay the money back and pay the fines. They created payment plans for them. None of that stuff applies to anybody on the conservative side of the spectrum. They've done all of they do press releases attacking Tim Wyman or Kim Wyman or anybody else that's on the conservative side of the spectrum. And so it is not equal treatment under the law. It's not even remotely close. It's almost so extreme, the difference, that it's really embarrassing. I'm surprised that, but they're willing to keep doing it because they get away with it, and the media is going to let them get away with it. And so I think that it's really important for people to realize when I first got involved in the political process, and I wasn't as familiar with who was who. I was pretty new, 2011. I remember I went to this Realtors Association meeting, and I sat next to a judge. Not that I knew it. I didn't know she was a judge at all. In fact, I was halfway through the dinner, and I found out that's what she was. Well, she recognized my name at the time, but didn't know who I was, which is great. And she started telling me that she really viewed her position as a judge was to push the progressive agenda. And that was how she viewed her position as a judge. She was very open and clear about it because I think she thought I was a leftist. And so she felt like she could openly speak to me and tell me about it. And I listened, and I was shocked. And to this day, I regret I didn't really pay attention to who she was. I didn't understand how significant that statement was to me. It really sunk in later on. But how many other judges do we have in the state who view their position not to follow the law, not to make sure that the Constitution is followed, but to actually push a political agenda with every decision that they can make while they're in office?
And why? Because we have a legal system.
Correct. Yeah, it's not justice at all.
There you go.
We have a justice in Washington State that just recently got into a little bit of trouble for comments online.
Sure.
And she's made several comments online that they're saying, hey, you can't do that too. But it showed that she is a leftist person on the Supreme Court here in Washington State.
Right.
And her comments were talking about the headgear, the headpiece that you can wear in Congress, during that fight. And, it was one of those things. But she comes online and she starts talking about stuff like this all the time. And I think it's very inappropriate for her to do so. And I even commented on her post and told her that, she was probably going to get in trouble for this. And she did.
Well, and then that's, of course, the problem is that that judges have recognized, and especially at the state level, and it's terrible, Superior Court all the way up, but where they're basically, their decision-making, when they have the opportunity to do so, forget the Constitution or anything. I've been in court cases already where the judge just blatantly, they'll ignore and totally throw out they don't care what the Constitution says. They have an opportunity to punish a conservative, they'll do it. And they have the opportunity to punish a business they don't like, they'll do it. They have an opportunity to punish even other Democrats that are maybe outside of the mainstream, they'll do it. And it doesn't matter, the law is irrelevant. And they know that the chance of overturning that on appeal is difficult, and they don't even care because they feel like, hey, we'll ring up the bill for these people, and I've got my progressive credentials, and I'll be able to go work the wine and cheese crowd circuit, and I'll be elected next year, nobody even notice.
Yeah.
Because they've gotten away with it for years.
I want to move on to, you've done a number of great stories on your website, We the Governed. There's a couple that I want to make sure that we cover and mention, because one of the things that people in our region and even outside our region, I was actually in Olympia one time with a group of people that came from a number of different counties, but they were there to protest the Department of Ecology. And some people wonder, what has actually been happening in the Department of Ecology, and what are some examples of significant overreach? And in the efforts that they've made in the Department of Ecology, are they fact-based, science-based type of complaints and issues that they're bringing up? And a story that I want to make sure, and there's actually several of them that you guys can find at the website We the Governed. But a couple that I want to mention, and one story that I actually want to share in its entirety because this is such a great example of how bizarre some of these bureaucratic agencies, how bizarre their efforts can come to, and how they're not based in fact or science or reason or anything else. Kyle, if you would, bring up the video on the Cross family. I want to show that one. We'll talk a little bit about Oysterville as well, but bring up the one on Cross family. It's a little more than 7 minutes long, but well worth your time to see this. So let's roll the video. Take us off the screen, would you?
My name is Randy Cross, and this is my lovely wife, Kathy, and we're coming to you today from our home in Whatcom County, right outside of Bellingham, where we've resided for the past 26 years. And right behind us is the 3-acre pasture where our beloved Ozzy and his field mate, the llama Ashley Ann, lived in joy and harmony for the past 16 years.
He was actually very famous in the jumping world because he was an amazingly beautiful horse and a great competitor. We're just really fortunate that he's been in our family this long.
The Cross family, like most property owners, love their animals and are good stewards of their land. They never expected to become targets of an aggressive government agency.
Our story begins with the Department of Ecology and Jessica Fitzpatrick about mid-May of 2016. She made it clear to me there was a huge problem out here on the Kelly Road with our horse and llama on a 3-acre pasture potentially polluting the Silver Creek watershed.
The Department of Ecology claimed that animal waste could somehow pollute the watershed even though there is no stream on or near the Cross property.
This was a big surprise to me because we've had large animals in the back field for the past 20 years and we've never had any issues, never had any problem.
These agencies were looking for a potential problem, not trying to fix a problem.
I asked Jessica if she had any empirical evidence where they came out and tested the water coming onto my property, then tested the water coming off of my property to show Kathy and I that we were in violation and polluting the watershed. She said not only did she not have to do that, but she wouldn't do that, and we couldn't test our own water, and that it was just the mere fact that we had the potentiality of polluting. Kathy and I made our best effort to accommodate ecology, so we called the Conservation District and we made an appointment and we had Chuck Timlin come out to look at our property. He was very confused why he was even out there, that our property was in the top 0.5% of people that are doing it right.
Chuck from the Conservation District dictated farm plans to the Cross family, which would have required them to install 600 feet of extra fencing, 400 feet of extra water line, inventing buffers, and fence off Ozzy from his barn, water, and food. Every version of these plans would cost their family thousands of dollars for no measurable benefit to the water, the land, or the environment. Everything was based on a theory invented by unaccountable bureaucrats that maybe this horse and llama were polluting the watershed. Agencies often have agendas. They need to invent new regulations and new theories like this in order to expand their budget and to justify their existence.
To my amazement, once I peeled back their own farm plan, they require a large animal, in our situation, to be on a minimum of 1 acre, and here in their farm plan, they're wanting me to pin them up in 3/4 of an acre. That did not make sense to me.
I would go to sleep at night, lay in bed thinking, what are we going to do? How did this even happen? We're great stewards of our property. We take care of everything. We seriously thought about, would we have to euthanize him? How are we going to find a home for him? He's too old. Nobody wants a 28-year-old horse.
We even had our vet come out here and check out the horse to confirm that he was in the twilight of his life. And we have a written letter from the vet stating that if we were to move him, that it would probably kill him. We were not going to sign the farm plan. We were just not going to roll over for an oppressive government agency trying to cram their agenda down our throat. So we contacted our elected representative in Olympia, Vincent Buys, and he came out to our property.
After taking a look at the actual field and what ecology was saying was a problem, I was very frustrated with ecology. So my next call was to ecology to see, hey, look, what's going on here? I went and checked the property. I don't see anything wrong with this property. Specific to that conversation with ecology, I asked the director of the Bellingham field office, were samples taken of the water quality to indicate that we had an issue here? And he had said, yes, there were samples. Turned out later that there were no samples actually taken. That gets very frustrating for me as a state representative when I have agency personnel directly telling me that they have samples or they have proof of something, and then when they don't, and kind of directly lying to me about that. That's very frustrating for an elected official when anybody does that, let alone our own state agencies. And I definitely feel for constituents when they feel like they have no recourse when agencies are dishonest with them.
So during this fight with ecology, we had Ozzy's vet come out, and we were told that his heart rate was half of what it is normal. And by the next week, it was worse. And unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, we had to have Ozzy euthanized. When it was over, though, we just couldn't let the battle be over. Yes, ecology was done with us. Ozzy was gone. But the problem is not over. We had so many people come by, call us, email us, Facebook us about the same thing. People who had lost their 4-H animals for their kids had to give up their goat, their sheep, their horse because of ecology.
How in the world can good, decent people come under the foot of an oppressive government agency for no reason whatsoever, because I thought in this country you're innocent until you're proven guilty? This could be coming your way soon.
Our state agencies really need to make sure that they understand that they need to be working with the citizens to create a solution instead of being part of the problem.
Our message to you is that we need to band together. We need to have a voice. We just have to stand up. And through Ozzy's legacy, which is what we're doing now, is we're continuing this fight, that we will be with you if it happens to you.
All right, so that was the story about the Cross family.
Yep.
And that should make you cross, hearing that story. Should tick off anybody. And so the reason why I wanted to make sure that this story specifically got shared, and actually we have the time to, and I want to run this other one on Oysterville as well, because this also involves the Department of Ecology and was this Pacific County?
Pacific County, yeah.
Yes.
Definitely Pacific County Prosecutor's Office and the county commissioners out there, and then the bureaucrats that are kind of the feeding frenzy, behind it all.
So set up this Oysterville real quick. How did this, you mentioned that there's a squabble with a family member before that was politically active, and so that's how the politics got involved in this?
That's how it starts, right? So yeah, and the next one is going to be a story. So the Cross family's from Bellingham, Whatcom County, so Northwest Washington. This is from Pacific County, so out on the coast. And in this case, it was a family, it really was initiated by a complaint filed by a family member who really was just trying to, looks like they were just trying to get the business, right, or trying to take it themselves. So, and listen, that happens. You can't stop family squabbles. Those things are going to happen. You always have somebody out there like that. What we shouldn't have is government stepping in and deciding that they're going to use the power of the state and the resources that the state has and the taxpayers give them to get involved and abuse people beyond all rational thought, beyond all rational reason, beyond anything that's proportionate to even the claims that are being made in the beginning. So,
And I don't know if these gentlemen have had a chance to visit Oysterville, but I have, and this is actually, this is a really cool business.
It is. It's
and
it's
the
awesome,
setup
yeah.
they have there is like really, really awesome.
Right.
And to see the heartache and I mean, they're doing their very best to run a business place out of business. I would really love it with, when you think about all this cost that they're costing this poor farm in Oysterville. If all the prosecutors and all the people had to endure a same kind of financial hardship, you know, to do all of this stuff to these people, that would seem a little bit more fair, while the action itself isn't fair at all. But I want you to see the story here on Oysterville, because for people who have wondered, why would anybody go to Olympia and protest the Department of Ecology on an issue like Millennium or other places, you have to really understand how dishonest this office actually is. Go ahead, Kyle, play Oysterville.
My name is Dan Driscoll. I'm the last oysterman left in Oysterville. Oysterville Sea Farms is my heritage. It's my life's work, it's my dad's life's work, and I never thought that I'd have it taken away from me in one day. Can you imagine Oysterville with no oysters? I founded Oysterville Sea Farms in 1991. It's an extension of my father's business, Driscoll Oyster Farms. My family has commercially used the Oysterville cannery structures since the 1930s. There really is enough of my blood in this building that it feels like a relative. There's enough blood of my dad's, my grandfather's, that this is part of our heritage.
Dan Driscoll's business had grown into a local destination featured in travel shows and beloved by many people in the community. But it is under a relentless bureaucratic and legal assault by central planners in Pacific County and various state agencies attempting to shut this business down and prevent them from serving customers. In June 2011, with no warning, investigation, or option to appeal, Dan Driscoll was served with a cease and desist order on his business. This all started with complaints initiated by jealous competitors and a distant family member. These complaints alleged improper remodeling and repairs of the historic buildings, questioned the legitimacy of the business, and claimed his business didn't conform to land zoning. 5 years later, Dan is still in court. Squabbles and jealousy are unfortunately part of human nature. What most people don't expect to see is government abusing its power, budget, and endless resources to become part of that squabble. Pacific County Commissioners, the county prosecutor, and county planner dedicated enormous resources to prosecute, harass, and litigate against Oysterville Sea Farms. Pacific County also enlisted the help of various state agencies to hassle the small local business. Ever since then, Dan has been defending himself in court.
For the last 5 years, Pacific County has harassed and challenged every aspect of Oysterville Sea Farms' retail operation in what seems like every possible way. I just have to say, I get confused what we can do and not do because it changes all the time.
Dan had permission and licenses to sell a variety of items to his customers. Then an endless tide of ever-changing demands and restrictions rolled in from Pacific County. Dan farms and sells oysters, but the county said no more oyster shooters. His signature wine was banned. He's a seafood market, but he can't slice, portion, and weigh fish anymore. Then clam chowder was banned too. Oh, wait a second. A judge ruled he could sell wine again. Pacific County is the cranberry capital of America, but Dan was told not to sell them either. He sold groceries, but he was told not to sell bottled water or cereal. Briefly, he was harassed over souvenirs he was selling. Oh, but now he can sell bottled water again. Dan is just so fed up now, he's just going to be selling those cranberries again anyway. If you think this was ridiculous, he was told by Pacific County in order to have chairs on his deck, he needed to install a portable toilet. Then, after he installed the toilet, Pacific County ticketed him for having those chairs. Even though these historic buildings have been here since the 1930s and were grandfathered long before current land use regulations, Pacific County is still attempting to deny any commercial use of this property to Oysterville Sea Farms. Now, most businesses collapse under this type of pressure, but Dan has fought back.
The only access to due process Oysterville Sea Farms has had during the last 5 years is expensive litigation. In addition, I've had people in the government say that I need to get along with them, I need to compromise. To tell somebody that they need to compromise when you're taking from them, this is completely worthless. I was told that the Oysterville Sea Farms problem would be solved once and for all, and it'd be solved by having Oysterville Sea Farms retail building, pier, and Oysterville Sea Farms dock torn out. When I made a public records request, Pacific County told me it'd take up to 1,500 business days to make those records available.
When Pacific County chose to start harassing Dan, Oysterville Sea Farms had about a dozen full-time employees. After years of uncertainty, litigation, and harassment, Dan is only able to retain a handful of part-time employees as he tries to fend off Pacific County's relentless attacks. When Pacific County has lost in court, they always appeal to a higher court, costing the taxpayers even more and pushing Dan and his business closer to the brink of financial ruin.
Hundreds of people have stuck their neck out and stood up for Oysterville Sea Farms at public meetings and in letters. Additionally, there's been thousands of petitions asking people to lift the cease and desist order and asking the county to do whatever it can to have Oysterville Sea Farms exist and thrive and be the vibrant community asset it was. The county's ignored all that. The county has effectively destroyed a vibrant community asset. Business owners in this community are terrified of what's happened to Oysterville Sea Farms. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody.
Do we want to live in a society where small local businesses can thrive and prosper, providing the jobs, the goods, and the services that we all want? Or are we going to be forced to watch as Pacific County and other state agencies collude to destroy the last oyster farm in Oysterville?
So a couple things. There's several takeaways out of this, Glenn. But he says, if it happened to me, it can happen to anybody. That is absolutely true. In fact, even in the cross situation that we just saw with the horse and the llama, that was happening to all the neighbors around these people, was it?
Yeah, hundreds of neighbors up there in Bellingham, and the Oysterville farm story is still ongoing. I mean, this video now is dated, but he is still in court. He's prevailed, and they keep throwing something new at him constantly. It's just a constant battle for this guy. And if it wasn't for the fact that Dan was so committed, to a longtime family business like this, and has decided that he's just going to stick it out, I'm sure he'd be gone, and most people in that circumstance would be. And the question is really, when you look at a government entity like this that's willing to keep doing this, Pacific County and Department of Ecology and all these groups, the question is how many thousands and hundreds of other people, right, businesses and thousands of people they put out of business or ended their jobs or ended their careers or destroyed their dreams. I was going to do a whole series on the dream destroyers, right, which is just going to be featuring different planning departments or state agencies like the Department of Ecology that exist primarily to destroy people's lives in many ways. They put a veneer that they're supposedly protecting, the environment, but in most cases you can't even find a nexus to any protection related to the decision-making process they go through as they abuse or attack people. You can find a nexus to how much money they want to get in the next biennium budget at the state capitol. You can find a nexus to the grants that they receive. You can find a nexus to how many employees they want to hire. But you can't, oftentimes, you'll find there's no nexus between the actions they take and protecting the environment. And they care not at all about the destruction that they and the wake of destruction that they leave throughout the communities in the state.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
Chris. You look like you had something.
No, I'm learning. No, not at all. It's just that it's hard to believe that our government can do these things to us and really just go after you like that, and nobody can do a thing.
Well, it's not that nobody can do anything, but I think the one thing you have to do initially, and that's what I was hoping to do with some of these videos, and I plan on, it's one of the things I plan on doing a lot more of in the future now that the campaign finance drama is hopefully kind of winding itself through.
You fixed that problem.
Yeah, not totally, but a little bit. But one of the things is the first step you have to do is you have to tell the truth. expose the truth about the stories, because most of these people who are going through this oftentimes feel like, and it doesn't matter whether it's a pocket gopher story in Thurston County, it doesn't matter whether it's a wetland setback in Okanagan, it doesn't matter whether it's the wolves in Stevens County, whatever it is, most people who are suffering through this think that they're alone, or they feel very isolated and alone. Maybe them and their neighbors, and this is on purpose. These agencies and the special interests that support them oftentimes really want to isolate you and make sure that you feel like you're totally alone, it's hopeless, and they're going to destroy you and crush you. And by, I think, telling the truth about these stories, more people are willing to come forward, and that's what I found, is that they'll come forward and they'll say, you know what, you're not alone. They're doing it to me over here. I didn't realize there was somebody else that they were doing this to as well. And I think that the more that you tell those stories, the more you're likely to change the way people view their local government and how they're treating people. So.
Fantastic stuff. And to the point that Chris is making, that a lot of people share that thought that can anything be done? And if you give some pushback, will it result in anything positive? Is it possible to not just slow down the erosion of property rights and all these different rights that are being trampled on by government? People ask that question. Or is it possible just to maintain ground? Well, there's stories out there that by putting the right minds together, coming up with an intelligent strategy, figuring out the way to combat these issues properly, with facts, with information. These are the scary things, that whenever somebody's involved in corruption, and this is one of the reasons why these things aren't that difficult to expose, because people that are involved in these corrupt practices, using the government or the law or whatever to just go after and attack people, that's not the way those systems are. That's not what they were designed to do. And that kind of behavior becomes obvious. It becomes easier to expose than you might think. And one of the stories that I'm like really encouraged by that you published was the story on the SeaTac City Council. This was a community and a council that was largely, when I say owned and operated, it really was by the people on the left, and they held those positions for a good long time. They really had a stranglehold on the city. Talk a little bit about some of the dynamics going on in SeaTac prior to the new city council. What kind of initiated all of this?
Well, I think, and this is a really interesting story, and it's particularly interesting because you're looking at a city that's one of the fifth poorest city in Washington State by per capita. Relatively high crime rate, a lot of problems, with it. It's not like it's in the middle of Stevens County. It's in the heart of King County. It's next door to Seattle. So you would think that it's a hopeless cause.
And while the airport is there and airplanes are taking off, the city itself is definitely not taking off.
No, it wasn't taking off. And so what's interesting about it, really, and I'm actually in the process of doing another video as a follow-up to this original video that I did in 2016 is when I did this original video, just talking about how these citizens, regular citizens, said they were tired of it. Regular people, a lot of them with very little political background, and decided they wanted to run for the city council. And it seemed hopeless because they were outspent 8-1, right? Every single special interest was on the other side. It was completely, it didn't look like there was any chance, and yet all four of the incumbents were removed, and at that cycle, and these new people got in 2017, which I didn't talk about in that video because it was 2 years later. They the remaining two problematic incumbents also got booted, and so and it doesn't mean it was perfect in Nirvana when they got in, but they went from having a $3 million deficit when they got in, and the previous city council, once they realized that they were being replaced, purposely went in and tried to sabotage the city with everything they did in their budget.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, classic. Because they felt like they would stick the new council with a bunch of problems. And they didn't realize the new council didn't have some of the baggage, and they came in and they were willing to cut the budget. They were willing to actually, lower taxes. They went from having a $3 million deficit.
Did you say lower taxes?
Yeah, they went from a $3 million deficit to a $23 million surplus. In a short window of time. They were able to reduce the bureaucracy. They actually increased the police hiring because they were having to deal with a lot of crime, and they were able to reduce the crime rate in the city substantially, and they lowered taxes. And I mean, this is not normal. This is not, we're told this is impossible, actually. And so, and there were unique problems the city had with the airport there and other things that make it undesirable for, people to be there. I mean, there's some business benefits being near the airport, but it was really a contrast. And it doesn't mean they were perfect. It doesn't mean the people who got in there were perfect. They were regular people. They had infighting amongst themselves like there always is, no matter what. But the net benefit is just unmistakable. And there's no way you can deny the benefit that they brought to the city as regular citizens getting involved. And it even included things just like simple things, like going through every single week. Several of the council members would go through every single line item expenditure that the employees would do. And I know that sounds, you think, well, doesn't everybody do that? No, the reality is 99% of the elected officials don't even pay any attention to it. They might look at the macro level. They never look at the details of what's being spent in the city. They actually did this. And they would find all kinds of little things that were problematic in the beginning. They'd ask questions. And once staff knew that somebody was paying attention, suddenly all these expenditures started to reduce. You know, and that helps save money. And I mean, there are all kinds of little things. It all adds up. And the city is in far better shape today than it was when they took over. And it's impossible to argue that fact. Now, of course, the left is coming after them, you know, and they're going to do everything in their power to come back and attack the city. But it can be done if it can be done in CTAC.
We want our $3 million deficit back.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they want you know, they want $50 million more in taxes, right? They want every single special interest to come in there and profit from their largesse as they take over. And I think that's what the council will have to fight. You know, regular citizens there will have to fight that. But it's an example that it can be done. You can come in, you can make a difference, even in a city that seems hopeless.
I had no idea anybody up that direction even knew what the word tax break meant. I mean,
tax reduction.
Tax reduction.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know.
geez,
I mean, reduce fees. It was impressive.
You would think that these communities around them that are struggling, like Tacoma and Seattle, would look at what they're doing and be like, yeah, maybe we should do some of this. Or,
no, and instead what happens is that's the last thing they want to do is to look at it. So the Seattle Times will basically go silent. In fact, the election results afterwards, when it didn't go the way that the progressives were anticipating there, the Seattle Times actually took away all election results and never even reported on what happened in the city of SeaTac. So just to show you how the media treats us.
Oh my God.
So I mean, that's how it goes. You know, that's how they actually deal with these issues.
So what it sounds like from, you know, talking to you today, that there's a lot of people out there that pick on conservatives, almost like they're being discriminated against, almost in a way.
But you know, it's more than that. I think it's not just conservatives, not just libertarians. It's really anybody who's not willing to buy into the groupthink, like these Democrats that have come to help me, or who provided me information. It's anybody who doesn't buy into whatever the establishment mindset or the grant scam game that's going on. Anybody that doesn't buy into that and doesn't accept that wholeheartedly and enthusiastically is ostracized and attacked and alienated and cut out. I mean, look at that video that was done up in Seattle, the Seattle's Dying video, the powerful impact that's had up there. And the people who put that together aren't conservatives. They aren't Republicans. They aren't some, you know, there are people that have common sense and they realize that something's wrong and they're willing to do something like that, and they will be ostracized and attacked forever because they've done that.
Yeah.
And but there are people all across the political spectrum willing to do that, and that's really what we want more of in this state, I think. So
what's next for Glen Morgan?
Well, I haven't written a lot lately because I've been planning for kind of the next stage of what's going on, and I do plan to do a lot more videos. Some of the Tales of Tyranny videos, I'd like to get back and doing more of those. I'm planning to actually launch a weekly video, kind of like a podcast thing that I haven't generally done in the past. And a lot more exposés about corruption around Washington State. The campaign finance drama, I think, is kind of winding down a little bit. You know, there'll be a bunch more fines. You'll hear about fines and settlements coming out. But as those things kind of go through the system, and there's other issues that need to be covered in the state, and I want to be heavily engaged and involved in that, and hopefully encouraging more people and to do their own thing and find their own way of exposing the truth about where they live.
You know what I'm hearing right now? The target on his back, it just grew like 5 times bigger.
Yeah, it always does. But you know, somebody has to get out there and do this stuff. And so, and it's not that I'm important. I'm not. I'm just a regular person doing the best I can in the way that I think is right. And other people don't have to imitate me. They just can hopefully be inspired and do find their own niche or their own way of doing this. And it isn't easy. I don't pretend like it is. It's not a path to making money. It isn't. But it is a path to making change. And so however you want to make, however you want to work in your community, whatever it is that you want to focus on, like I said, follow your passion, follow what interests you. You can make a difference where you live. It is possible. And it isn't always political either. It's oftentimes just exposing the truth about what's going on in the community be. And when you start to influence how people, they just get to see the truth, exposing the truth. There's the truth will set you free, right? But it actually, there's a lot of evidence to support that statement. If you expose it, I think things start to change when people realize just how bad or how good or whatever the story is that you're exposing. If you can expose that and make sure the largest number of people possible know what's happening, the more likely it is you'll make a difference where you live.
One of the really encouraging things that come out of our conversation here today is you sharing that in the situations of campaign finance, that you had people coming to you from the Democratic Party sharing with you corruption that was going on with candidates in their party. And that's a really encouraging thing to me. We've shared often here on the show, and I've talked about this at length many, many different times, is that we have this reasonable group of Americans, whether it's Washington or the United States, but we have this reasonable group of people, and to me, they're the people that are inside the left field foul line and the right field foul line, and there's all this reason. This is where the real game is going on, but unfortunately, you have these extremists that go all the way up to the nosebleed section on the left side, and go all the way up to the nosebleed section over on the right side, and so much politicking is happening in the background, and money and corruption and everything else is going on. But it's really encouraging to hear that there are people exist in both parties, voices of reason, who are interested in situations that you were involved in, and many other people that are out there. You'll find people from both parties who are going to say, you know what, we want to see the end to this garbage. And that's, to me, that's a fantastic takeaway here today.
And I think that's the thing people have to remember, is that it doesn't matter. I'm perceived as this, depending on the newspaper calls me or the media calls me at a given time, sometimes I'm a libertarian activist, sometimes a conservative activist, sometimes a Republican activist, right? Whatever they want to call me. But the truth is I spend a large portion of my time speaking to people on the left who have been disillusioned, who have been cut out, who have been harmed themselves, who have been realized that there's something wrong, and they're willing to approach me. They aren't willing to approach Republicans that are perceived of as cowardly and unwilling to actually do anything. That's one of the challenges you have in this kind of idea, blue-red kind of perspective. But they are willing to approach somebody who's a truth teller or who's willing to actually expose the truth, who's willing to actually go out and do that. And I couldn't do it, frankly, without the Democrats and without people on the left who are willing to expose the truth in their own way. Without that, I couldn't do anything that I'm doing right now, and I really appreciate that. And we have to do more of it, and what I'm hopeful is that there's going to be a lot more people who are willing to do it in their own way. They don't have to imitate me. Again, I'm not that important, but if they can find a way to do it, we can make a big difference, I think, in this state.
I want to close with this. You mentioned about the red thing and the blue thing and how parties have grabbed these various colors and said, this is our party of affiliation. But for me, and I know from conversation that you and I have had as well, this is the way that I feel about things. My party affiliation isn't red or blue. It's actually red, white, and blue. I'm for America and for Americans and doing what's right based on the Constitution and based on the rights the basic rights that we as citizens have. That's where your focus should be. And the facts, the information, etc., don't frighten me in the least bit, because if I'm either saying or doing something that is wrong or inaccurate or factually inaccurate, I would much rather somebody come to me and say, hey, that needs to be fixed and here's why. Share the information with me. I don't run away from the facts ever. Let's talk about the facts. And the more of that kind of thing that we have and that we can encourage in this country and in our state, the more change that we can bring about, because we have to have people interested in the truth. Well, special thanks, Glen, for joining us here on
as always. Thank you.
Digital News. Glad to have you here.
Thank you guys for hosting me here, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Kevin Hunter with Glen Morgan and Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgerson here on Northwest Digital News. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
This concludes today's live programming on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast. Heard around the world in more than 70 countries on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and Twitch TV. If you enjoyed a story or guest we had here on Northwest Digital News and would like to strut your stuff on the broadcast, email us today at wainfo2017@gmail.com or call or text to 360-545-3501. We're always interested in unique stories, topics, and guests to share with our worldwide audience. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and comment on the live stream. And for those of you who'd like to financially support the broadcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Northwest Digital News. We thank you for your patronage. On behalf of Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgeson, Stephanie Hunter, and all the people that made this broadcast possible, I'm Kevin Hunter. Till next time, take care.